My earliest solid memories are from when I was living with my mom in Winnipeg, specifically 78 Fletcher Crescent Avenue in Winnipeg. Before that, I have some vague memory of talking about Ottawa, having lived in Ottawa, Canada before that. I have only little bits and pieces of memories, perhaps not even that, but there is some correspondence I dug up recently that jibes with Ottawa, Canada. So rather than make an entire video, do an entire bit of research to create the video, I'm going to simply create the video later on, and when I publish it, I will add the link here or here, wherever I can put the link along the way YouTube works. It was a nice small home. It reminded me kind of a farmhouse. It didn't look like a farmhouse, I suppose because in the back I do remember there being a shed of some type. Inside there was a small living room, and then after that there was a large living room with a linoleum. There was a bathroom. I had my own bedroom. My mom had her bedroom somewhere. We would order pizza sometimes or Chinese food. I remember a delivery man coming with, for example, I remember him carrying this package that kept the pizza warm for us. That was a nice memory. I love Chinese food. I love pizza even today. Now, I've done some record keeping, some reconstruction, looking up documents and so forth for the past couple of years, well, past few years. I've been able to reconstruct, also thankfully, due to my mom's careful photocopying and record keeping and record preserving. I'm able to construct that I was living with my mom and dad in Boston in 1980, and then after that, sometime my mom would have left with me and probably settled in Ottawa. Again, I will put that in a future video when it gets published. But again, to give you sense of time, 1982, 1983 would have been my first grade year. I lived in Winnipeg. I must have lived in Winnipeg at least for that year. I don't know how many earlier years, but I remember one Halloween I dressed up as a farmer. I had farmer overalls, whichever one has the front, the farmer overall front with the straps around the shoulders, and I probably had a hat. I sort of remember having a cap gun. I remember one winter my mom enrolled me in ice skating lessons, which I did not like, and I remember it was on a weekend. It was perhaps a Saturday or a Sunday, and I'd rather sit home and watch cartoons or whatever. I vaguely remember Looney Tunes reruns being on, so it was probably in the morning. I didn't go there for that long a period of time. We absolutely had to have had a TV because I can remember watching certain shows. I remember enjoying The Muppet Show very much. In fact, I ordered and got a Kermit the Frog hand puppet. It went down to the sleeve. You wore it sort of like a glove and had the hands with the Velcro on so you could attach them to things or attach the wrists together. It wasn't very fancy. It was simply, his body simply went straight down as opposed to what I wanted, which was more like the TV show where it would bulge, be more spheroid. But I did like that. I remember even sucking on his mouth. for whatever reason. I guess little kids can tend to do that. I like the velvet, the felt fabric. So the Muppet Show was one of them. I also enjoyed the I Dream of Jeannie, the show I Dream of Jeannie very much. And in my room, I remember imagining or fantasizing that I was in that genie bottle the way she would. If you've seen the show, you would know that when she was in her bottle, there was a special set where there were pillows or whatever if she were in the bottle. And I imagine my bedroom being something like that. I also probably imagined having magical powers or wanting magical powers that she had. What other shows? I mentioned Looney Tunes before, although I don't think I watched a lot of Looney Tunes. I wrote down some. Superman. I probably was a fan of Superman at that point. I would have seen the Superman movies, the first two movies, maybe three. I'd have to check when the third one came out. But Superman was and has been still my favorite comic book character, comic book superhero. I also remember tuning in about halfway through an airing of The Sound of Music. It was a scene where the Van Trapp family was sitting around at the dining table, and I remember having already seen it before because I recognized that scene and I knew which movie it was. Now, one day, for whatever reason, I don't even remember how I dressed up, but I had kind of more baggy clothes, maybe a coat, something like that. I had already seen the movie Mary Poppins, and I went over to my mom. She was sitting on the chair, and I pretended to be Mary Poppins. Now, in retrospect, considering my cross dressing now, I wonder about that then. But I thought I'd mention that. Now, this is weird. It's not often that you remember all your dreams. Perhaps some of us remember all of our dreams. I don't know. I've remembered some of them. I remember being in Winnipeg, perhaps, and sitting at the foot of my bed in my dream, head, or I remember it actually as head of the bed, this white hand um, gesticulating towards me, just sitting there, as if somebody was under the bed and had stuck a hand up and was just doing this. And in the dream, I felt intrigued. I don't want to quite say mesmerized, but simply intrigued and curious. Now, here's a mystery I would really like solved, and I want to do more videos about my journey, learning, and uncovering the details behind this. I remember talking with my mom in that final year before she suddenly died, and she told me about having found randomly in the phone book a last name for us. And for some reason, it didn't mean much at the time when she told me, but afterwards, thank goodness she told me. It's, sometimes in life when people pass away, you're very glad that they happen to tell you something, or there's some small moment that really gives clarity later on in better context. Well, after she died, I remembered learning my name. We were in Winnipeg, and she had me remember my name, Jeffrey Michael Egan, Egan. And it doesn't make much sense. I've looked and found the documents related to that year at Crane School and I found my name listed with that name, as that name, with a different birth date on it. I think it was something like February. I'll have to check, and perhaps add it to that future video I'm talking about. Why did she have that happen? I remember another moment when there were some officers or officials knocking at the door. There were men knocking at the door, and my mom had me hide, I think, behind a wall, not to make sounds. They were knocking, and I remember something about be careful not to be seen through the window. Is that related? I'm wondering now, in retrospect, considering my mom left with me and I didn't grow up with my dad, that perhaps she left him and took me. There was one moment that, for what it's worth, perhaps bears mentioning. I remember my mom using our wall-mounted phone and calling to make a hair appointment, and she said it was urgent. I asked her shortly before she died, that year, previous year, knowing that she heard voices afterwards. I don't remember her hearing voices when we were living in Winnipeg, but in retrospect, I thought about that and I asked her, was that connected? And she said, no, it was for a different reason. But I still wonder about it. I remember a suspicion I had about her doing it so as to test whether somebody was listening in. Here's another odd moment I remember. My mom and I walking outside with bags of books and dropping some of the books in the garbage can, her saying that she wanted to give an impression that we were doing something normal, as if, in case anybody was watching. It doesn't make much sense. It would make a little bit of sense. I've sort of connected it with us moving to Binghamton. I remember there being a moment in Albany, perhaps for a month, but we stayed in Binghamton, as I recall, something like that summer. Would have been summer 1983. So I link it with perhaps getting rid of books or getting rid of excess stuff that we couldn't transport with us. My mom didn't have a car, so we probably used Greyhound buses. In fact, I'm quite sure I remember us using Greyhound bus rides and having bags, and it was an awkward situation. Of course, I was a kid, so it didn't affect me as much. I wouldn't have been under as much strain, but I wonder what was left behind. I mean, even now, I wonder what was left behind. So we settle into a kind of motel. I don't know exactly. I'll simply describe it. It wasn't a hotel. It was. I remember there being sliding doors, as if you go from your own unit out to the straight out into the outside world, which sounds kind of scary and unsafe. That's how I remember it, though. Not being unsafe, I mean that I remember it as simply some kind of sliding door situation. Weird. But I can pinpoint that that was the summer of 1983 because I remember Return of the Jedi coming out that very summer, or that time period, and it came out May, I think May 5th, May 1983. That was probably the first movie I had seen in a movie theater. Again, it wasn't the first movie at all, because I remember seeing, for example, probably Superman, and I know I had seen The Sound of Music on home TV. But this is probably the first time I was in a movie theater, and it's really nice to be able to identify and lock in on those early those early childhood moments. You can say the first time I did this, the first time that happened, my first experience here. So I remember going with my mom to see Return of the Jedi. I had seen it. I would see it several times. Again, we didn't have a car. I remember the commercials on TV. I remember she afterwards, probably after or before, she bought me my first set of Kenner action figures of Star Wars. I remember Luke Skywalker and Hoth battle gear, probably Princess Leia, C3PO perhaps. I don't remember which specific figures. I do remember my mom saying she tried to get me the key, the key primary characters. And in retrospect, I'm happy to have had a mom who understood Star Wars, understood my interest in it. She probably shared some herself. I mean, she grew up reading science fiction. This would have been probably the 1940s, and she was born in 1933. So in 1955, when there was a lot of science fiction, good science fiction in literature and some in film, I suppose, she would have already been in her early 20s, like college, 18, 19, 20, when classic, really classic science fiction was coming out. So I really am, I feel gifted to have had a mom who not only understood that, but probably shared it. And since Star Wars was reminiscent, I mean, intentionally reminiscent and structured like the 1930s and 40s science fiction movies like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. Well, the movie serials at the time, where it would have episode 1, episode 2, and so forth, and a brief a crawl summarizing the events of the prior episode movie. It was something we could bond with. Not that we talked a lot together about, well, we did sort of, but it was a bonding experience. It was more like I could mention insights I had, and she'd be able to converse and talk for a while. The bonding relationship I had with my friends was very different. We played, it was very different. Perhaps you can understand. So I would have seen it several times in the movie theater. Oh, yes. So I remember going in to see Return of the Jedi, and it was probably a shopping mall. And I remember in the hallway there was a display with some kind of sound device where you can listen and hear C3PO expressing worry about going to see Jabba the Hutt. And it's so nice. I found a video on YouTube a few years back, with, I think it even had audio from those displays. And it would be really nice to get copies of that for preservation. But I remember that, and I remember the bus ride home, and the bus passed by a bicyclist who had been hit. And I remember one of the passengers in our bus I remember her saying, "Well, go on," which doesn't make much sense. All I remember is the bike rider being hit, I guess, by a motorist. And the interesting thing about that, of course, it's distinct in my memory, but the interesting thing is, theoretically, you could go back in Winnipeg, find out if it was reported who was hit, what bicyclist was hit, and identify what day I was on that bus. You can narrow it down. It's something I've sort of fantasized about. So after getting into Return of the Jedi, I remember my dad coming to visit us. It was probably a surprise visit. In retrospect, considering what I've talked about before about speculating my mom left my dad, I wonder what was going on behind the scenes. What conversations were they having? But anyway, from my point of view, I had already gotten into Return of the Jedi. I had the comic book illustration, the comic book adaptation of the movie. Of course, at that time, I didn't have VCRs. There wasn't any YouTube. There wasn't much of anything. Basically, if you were lucky, books with photos in them. So that was a big deal for me to have that comic book illustration, the whole movie to read through, and had the actual dialogue. Of course, some of it probably being altered before the final movie cut. He I had it when he visited. I remember him going with me to the grocery store, and I pointed out that I really liked what are those? I don't remember the exact name of the crunchy bar. It was peanutty. It was it was some common food. It was a snack. It was basically a peanut butter bar. Um, think of Rice Krispies or something. And he said, "Here, why? If you like it, here, go take it." That felt really nice because he was offering to pay for it. It was really nice. Another time, I remember him taking me to his one of his Catholic masses. Now he was a devout Irish Catholic. Of course, my last name is Linehan, so of course his last name is Linehan, uh, Leo Michael Linehan. And I remember him taking me to a church, and okay, from my point of view, this would be interesting to talk about. From my point of view, I had no knowledge about Christianity really whatsoever. I probably knew about the name Christian or Catholic. There was a church. I could maybe recognize a cross, but other than that, I had no knowledge. Christmas, to me, Christmas was something very different. And I should mention that, by the way, when we were in Winnipeg, I remember when it was snowing, meaning I would have been living there during the winter season, at least during that 1982-83 season, perhaps a year or something before that. I remember foam, like white, wispy foam, and I remember stencils. Perhaps you know what I'm talking about, that you'd put up on the window and then you'd spray it and then you'd remove the stencil and it would have a nice design of a tree or something in the window made of foam. I don't know how that works exactly. But anyway, so my vantage point, being non-religious, growing up in a really non-religious home, of being taken to mass, I remember something about the body, the body of Christ, and eating these wafers, and it seemed really weird to me. Like, how would a wafer be part of Christ's body? I imagined, silly as it seems, as of course now as a non-Jew or as a non-Christian. I mean, speaking now as a Jew or as a non-Christian. At the time, it seemed like you took a man's body and cut him up into pieces, and the pieces were saved, and you're eating these wafer bits that were part of his body. That's all I can. That's the image that I had. I hope YouTube doesn't strike me down for talking about this. I presume not. So when I got home, my mom learned that he had taken me to mass, and she was very just perturbed by that, disturbed by that. I remember sometimes hearing them talk in the bedroom. I had my own bedroom. I don't remember what it looked like, but I must have had my own bedroom. Um, Not much else beyond that. Now, Return of the Jedi really, really fascinated me to the point that I would take sticks or poles. Remember there being a pole with a circular rubber, well, hard plastic round thing stuck at the end of it, and I would swing it around like a lightsaber. In fact, I do have pictures my mom saved, photographs, even the negatives. I mean, my mom was so careful that she kept the envelopes back before digital cameras, modern day cameras, so forth. You would have a camera with film that you would put in, a film roll you would put in, and when you were done with the when you had filled up, taken all the pictures allowed in the film roll, you would take it to, like, for example, Kmart or a department store or something, and they would develop it for you, and they would contact you. You would get this envelope that would say Polaroid or Kodak or something, and it would have the date on it, the time or something, number of exposures or whatever. Inside would be the finished produced photographs and the negatives. And so my mom kept all those negatives with the photographs in the envelopes, and I still have that whole collection. So that was really nice. Basically, I loved Star Wars. Um, I would collect a few more action figures probably. I don't. It's an interesting question. Did I get any more action figures of Star Wars before moving to Wetzel Road? I don't know.